Hello, everyone, and welcome to this MHA Schools Masterclass on Digital Wellbeing. I'm your host, Greg Urquhart, and I'm from Mental Health Academy here in Richmond, Virginia. And joining me today for today's masterclass is Jocelyn Brewer. Hi, Jocelyn. How are you?
Hello, I'm so well here in the future in Sydney.
Awesome. Um, well, before we get going with the actual presentation, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to everyone, Jocelyn, in
Mhm.
case they aren't familiar with your work. Jocelyn Brewer is a Sydney-based psychologist and cyberpsychology consultant. Jocelyn was a social sciences and drama teacher across several public schools before retraining as school counselor in 2009. Her psychology honors thesis explored the impacts of increasing access to internet-enabled laptops on a cohort of grade 10 boys and the emerging area of problematic internet use, colloquially known as internet addiction. Uh, in 2013, Jocelyn created Digital Nutrition, a framework to help parents and technology users understand the virtual nutritional values of the online media content we consume via apps and games on tablets and screen technology. Jocelyn completed a Master's of Applied Science in Cyberpsychology in 2021 on the relationship between problematic smartphone use and self control in a cohort of seventh graders. Jocelyn is a sought after speaker and media commentator on issues relating to mental health, young people, and digital well being. Um, I have to edit things down and make them brief, but
No,
anything I missed out, Jocelyn, that you'd like to add before
no,
we
that's
begin the
plenty.
presentation?
That feels like way too much to begin with.
All right. Well, before we begin, a few housekeeping items I'll go over. You'll notice that you cannot talk during the webinar, but you can use the chat and Q&A tabs to interact with your peers and our team during the presentation and ask questions for the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Um, and again, at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A segment with Jocelyn. The session is being recorded and a link to the recording will be available via the event portal shortly after the conclusion of the live webinar, along with the presentation slides and a handout. You'll also see a certificate button via the event portal once the webinar has concluded. If you cannot actually see it, refresh your page. When you click the button, you'll be prompted to complete a short evaluation survey for the session. After you submit a survey, you'll be able to download a PDF copy of your certificate. Finally, if you need any assistance during the live webinar or after, just reach out to our team via the live chat or by emailing us at help@mentalhealthacademy.net. Actually, that's the US one, so just email us. Okay, with that out of the way, I'm going to disappear and turn things over to Jocelyn, and we'll rejoin for the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Jocelyn, the class is yours.
Thank you so much, Greg, and good morning, good afternoon, or hello, wherever you are. I'm joining you from the unceded lands of the Bidjigal people out here in Sydney, in the western suburbs of Sydney. And as you might know, if you're from Australia, we like to acknowledge the First Nations people and the land that we are on. So yeah, I kick off by doing that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Yeah, let's kind of cozy on in for the next sort of 90 minutes. My approach is very conversational. So whether you're looking at the slides or you're just listening to me, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey, I guess, through some of the questions that we have and some of the awareness that we have now of how immersed we are in digital technologies. Much of what I'm going to talk about, I guess, is not just from the perspective of our students and young people, but actually from the perspective of ourselves. And in the time that I have been doing this work, one of the biggest changes is that we are no longer just talking about young people's technology habits. We're talking about our own and the way that we role model those to young people. So yes, I am Jocelyn. Look, I haven't been in a classroom for probably since about 2010. Most of my work then became as a school counsellor, which is a duly qualified teacher and psychologist here in the state of New South Wales, where, I was a teacher for about 5 years before I did that retraining. I was 32 before I got my first smartphone. So I had all of those years of brain development before I started to kind of pick up this magical device almost every morning, first thing. So, we can compare that to the world that our young people grow up in and how quickly they adopt some of this technology. And as Greg said, I've been talking about digital nutrition since 2013. It's a trademark that I own. It's, something that really we'll have a deeper look at across this session because from what most people tell me, it makes a whole bunch of sense given how much time and energy we've invested into thinking about healthful eating. I want to start with some assumptions, though. Many of the times I give presentations like this, and especially to teachers, teachers are such a massive cohort. You come with usually tons of experience, and your deep lived experience of being in the classroom across lots of different school contexts, whether that's from primary school to high school, in sort of mainstream settings to more specialist settings. You don't need to have a high level of technology to kind of come into this. Some of you may already be leading technology in your schools. Some of you might not be sure what Roblox actually is. So I just encourage you to bring your curiosity. And if you need to extend your learning, and maybe I'm telling you things that you know already, get your questions sort of ready at the end because I do love a Q&A session. I'm also not going to give you done for you resources. I'm not here to kind of give you lesson plans or, tell you how to suck eggs in your classroom. But if you need additional support with actually working out how to embed these things, then absolutely get in touch. I intend to raise provocations, not just one size solutions. I think anyone who's trying to tell you this is the way to do things with young people and technology and their learning are probably overselling themselves because there's, as I say, there's so many individual differences between you as a teacher and the classes that you're teaching. And we know, a year 8 geography class from one semester to the next can be a completely different bunch of coconuts, depending on some of the personalities that we have in our classrooms. I'm not going to bang you over the head with resources, with references. Sorry, I'm not going to, quote you a million statistics. I think life is too short for digging too much into that. But if you want my references, if you want to know, well, you said this, where does that come from? Get in touch. I'm happy to supply it. We'll also play a game of typo bingo or tipio big no. Just to, if you are, following along, you can see already there's a few apostrophes missing in places and things like that. I don't aim to be perfect here, and it keeps you on your toes. If you do find some typos, you can play bingo in the chat. So I want to start by just reminding you that there's no app for teachers. I think our roles have changed and our world, I guess, is changing really dramatically. And even though, yes, ChatGPT might be able to do a whole range of things, and there's all of these different, band-aid solutions, there's no app for the human who is holding space in a classroom and building relationships with their student. You also might remember, and again, I'm probably showing my age, but just first to kind of start with a reflection on when this kind of stuff was high tech. I actually remember my first iPod because I handed it to the school captain at the school I was at. He took it home and he uploaded a whole bunch of torrented music onto my very first iPod, which, I can probably say without getting in trouble 15 years later. But again, I grew up kind of with a pink Walkman that I still have, where it didn't have a rewind button even. So how quickly technology has evolved, even around something as simple as how we listen to music. No longer do we sit with, the CD insert learning all the words. We maybe scroll through Spotify and learn the words that way. And certainly my 8-year-old daughter does that. remember when we didn't actually talk very openly about mental health? Again, your own experience as being a young person, maybe when you started teaching, and the differences in how we have more open conversations about this. And certainly, young people have an incredible level of emotional and mental health literacy. They're quite good at supporting one another and kind of have this awareness that we didn't have. And maybe you remember when parents parented their kids more actively. And I think one of the things I hear from teachers a lot is a bit of a gap between, I guess, some of the expectations of parents and the expectations teachers might have of parents around being actively involved in aspects of kids' lives. And again, that's a very complex one. We will sort of dig into that as we go, but certainly just something for you to start thinking about, like, how has this changed for you? And in your particular school setting, maybe. And you might think about, again, the differences in your mental load, your sense of busyness, how maybe sedentary your life has become based on when you got your first smartphone, even when you first started accessing email on a regular basis. And certainly before the pandemic hit and we all found ourselves really needing, the lifelines of our devices for connection, for teaching. Almost, we didn't work from home. We lived. What did they say? I'm going to get this wrong in my head. We didn't work from home. We lived from work. So that was a really tricky time that, again, you can maybe reflect on. So our current collective challenge is, to me, not being overplugged. Digital abstinence, while there's lots of conversations about this, I think it's really unrealistic for most of us. For many people, we do actually need our devices to be able to run businesses, to pick up our kids, to get all that, information from places. So I don't think it's realistic to go for full digital abstinence, but we do need clearer boundaries and better habits around how we use technology. And the question and reflection here is, how do we find the blend that builds these flexible skills to manage our need to be connected, informed, and competent? That this is not, I guess, a one size fits all. Spoiler alert, I do not have the answer around how many minutes of screen time is healthy. We need to think carefully about how we're connecting and why we're connecting. And we're going to go deeper into that as we move along. Because the world we live in is really screen immersed. And, again, I prefer a meme than a statistic. Person one, welcome home. Did you have a good day looking at your screens at work? Person two, yes, my screens were good. How were your screens? They were less good. So I'd like to watch something on the big screen in our house. Okay, but I might use my small screen while we watch. And again, you've probably seen lots of memes about this, of like, um, around millennials either, that you don't make purchases on your phone, and there's these really specific ways that we might actually think about using our devices, and the smaller screen versus the bigger screen, and watching screens together versus having our own personal experience. So what do these healthy tech habits even look like in 2025? How do we appraise the technology apps and platforms we select for use, personally, but also in the classroom, and whether or not you have a role in that or a say in that? And then what is the school's role in supporting digital citizenship, digital wellbeing, and digital literacy? And we'll kind of dig into what these things mean, because these are all, you can almost put digital in front of any word these days, and there's a kind of framework or a concept behind it. But these ones sort of parlay into one another, in terms of digital citizenship being that holistic view, digital wellbeing really being those healthy habits, and then the literacy, the ability to read information that is presented through online spaces. I don't think anyone has actually taught us how to use email. let alone live well online. And I think we need a new toolkit for dealing with these challenges to our well-being. So here are some, just a couple of the different kind of things I think of when I think about the skills or the challenges around being online. The addictive nature that some people would say technology has, the overload of information, our Zoom fatigue, which hopefully I'm not going to give you too much of today, our obsession with productivity and squeezing more out of our 24 hours and our brains and our ability to do more. Burnout generally, but again, digital burnout from, that Zoom fatigue, Zoom scrolling, brain rot, AI slop, the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and then echo chambers. And by now, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. Where are we learning these lessons? Well, hopefully these are some of them. Hopefully we are kind of starting to percolate on how we can actually be well connected in this kind of late stage capitalism, always on demand, AI anxiety fueled world. And we're only actually getting started when we think about some of the immersive technologies that are around, the extended realities and virtual realities, the way that generative AI, large language models like ChatGPT, and even large action models might be sort of really important digital driving skills that we need to have. I find most of it's trial and error, it's ad hoc, and sometimes common sense gets applied so that we kind of come out of it in a kind of healthy way, or it's sort of more luck than good management sometimes. And we can recognize some of those challenges, yet I don't think we're actually teaching some of these skills really, really specifically. And if we are, they're very fragmented across schools, across districts, sometimes even across classrooms or different faculties within schools. But how do we learn? I mean, most things in life we know we learn through these three R's of rehearsal, repetition, and role modeling. And I use the car analogy here. If you're from the States or other parts of the world, you guys do actually a much better job at driver education than Australia does. There's a lot of simulation, there's a lot of repetition. You have just a really different culture around learning to drive. And over the years, when I first learnt to drive, it was literally do a test, get your L's, do a test, get your P's. We now have provisional licensing, which is like green P's and then red P's. And there's all of these other kind of rules built into that around how many people in the car, what time you can be driving, the speed limits you can do. We don't go from observing our parents driving to jumping in a Ferrari and having a go. So we do need to actually create opportunities for young people to practice these skills in a safe and adapted space. So a space that actually has kind of like the Dodgem cars, the bumpers on them, or, training wheels on them, in order to do that without, literally crashing through life. And I'd ask the question, where are the opportunities for young people to learn digital driving skills? And probably more importantly, whose role is it to teach them? Because there is a bit of an elephant in the room around, the role of parents, the kind of bursting curriculums often, the social and emotional skills, and all of the additional life skills that people say, I wasn't taught this in school. I should be taught this in school. And traditionally we might say, well, is that a parent's, inverted commas, job? And this is one, I guess I don't want to get too deeply in, but again, just provoke the conversation. And obviously, it's a collaborative effort. It's a multi-stakeholder, ongoing iteration of collaboration and partnerships, because increasingly, as I said before, like adults are the ones who have terrible technology habits too, because we weren't taught, how to use email. We weren't taught what to put in the WhatsApp group chat and how to do, a private reply to someone rather than, clogging it all up with, our own little thread. So this is not just about young people being glued to screens, and I think there's bigger questions to ask why they have kind of ended up there. And certainly, the geography teacher in me looks across at Sydney and the increasing high density housing that we're building without additional parkland, without additional community spaces, and say, well, what are we expecting young people to do when they literally don't have access to anything more than really good Wi-Fi half the time? So parents and key adults role model expectations and really imply importance of online activities. So, lots of little ones, my daughter included, will say, Mum, you're on your phone too much, or what are you doing on your phone now? You should put your phone down. They have this awareness. And in my family's case, she has permission to actually notice and respectfully remind me of our collective goals, which is, we try not to be on our devices too much and have a little kind of agreement around that. So obviously you have a key role to play, but it's in partnership and collaboration, acknowledging too, depending on where you're at in your career or whether or not you have an executive role or a leadership and decision-making role, you might be quite limited in some of the choices and the kind of decisions that get made around the platforms or, the different activities that you can or can't do. So what is that teacher's role? Obviously, we're talking about really teaching your key learning area or your KLA. If you're from Australia, that's just your subject area, and embedding the general capabilities. And again, in the Australian curriculum, we have 7 general capabilities. Literacy and numeracy are there, obviously, but then we have the personal and social capability, the ICT capability, ethical understanding, critical and creative thinking, and another one I'm going to completely forget. But these are supposed to be, and depending on the state that you're in, and if you are in other jurisdictions, I'm sure there's some version of general capabilities or capabilities that we're trying to tap into your particular subject area. And again, I'm not going to research, a range of different teaching rules or teaching standards across different places. America has way too many states for that, but just generally go and suss out what it might mean in your particular area. You're obviously there to build trusting, respectful relationships with your students, to review your teaching practices and develop professionally, to monitor and report on wellbeing and issues in line with whatever child protection mandatory reporting you might have. But is confiscating devices and policing their use part of that? Right? Where does some of and obviously behavioral management is a key part of this. And I would actually say it fits into the trusting and respectful relationships, because that's how you actually support student behavior. But when we start having conversations about banning devices, policing bans, I think that really kind of then interrupts some of these things that really are within your role. And again, I'm purposely being provocative so you can sort of get the thinking and the reflections happening. What are young people actually doing online, though? I guess, again, in the chat, you might want to share some of the things that you've seen that are absolutely mind-blowing that kids are doing, or some of the really quite scary and spooky things that you might see them getting up to. It's not just about the apps that they're using or the games that they're playing, right? For whatever the newest TikTok is or whatever the coolest new game is, we actually want to dig into and understand the social capital and the micro interactions that they're having, because so much of this is actually about their sense of belonging and connection. What information are they sharing and how correct is this? I'll talk a little bit about, the group chats and how kids are trying to peer-to-peer connect, which can be wonderful, except when they're trying to peer-to-peer parent. And they're trying to provide kind of mental health information to one another, which is sometimes incorrect because they've learnt it from an influencer on TikTok. How do they then influence each other based on the information they have? And how do we seed or plant health, wellbeing, safety, and best practices into these spaces without it kind of seeming like chocolate covered broccoli, right? Here we are being cool in your space, just being cringe. And again, I'm going to share some ways that I think we can not get that right, but do it better. Smartphones get blamed for a lot, and really, in New South Wales, we started with banning smartphones in schools about 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago. Um, I've sort of talked about the device as being a hypodermic needle. It's what you deliver or what you consume with it that's really important, because a smartphone can actually be helping you monitor your blood glucose if you're connected to a kind of health app or your pacemaker. It can be mapping where your kid is. There's a whole range of things that the phone might actually do, but it's the platforms that really we want to look at. A smartphone is only smart if it has apps and Wi-Fi. No kid wants an iPhone unless it's connected to the Wi-Fi. So it's seen as a modern rite of passage for kids to have a phone. And there's lots of organisations that are attempting to delay that, which absolutely, I think that we can have really rigorous conversations about what we need phones for. Often people tell me they need phones for in case of an emergency. And I think even interrogating that idea of what is an emergency these days, like to me, an emergency is I'm in an ambulance going somewhere and I'm probably not able to actually send my mum a text at that point. So I think a lot of what we like, our sense of kids' safety and their ability to even free range and roam around has changed quite a bit in the last generation. Usually it's about the end of year 6 that personal adoption is happening. There is that rite of passage from primary school to high school. However, we do see that it's sometimes moving earlier because kids are getting either dumb phones or limited phones, or they're getting hand-me-down phones, just because there's so many phones in most households that many parents will have had, several iterations of phones. And that's, again, certainly the case with my daughter. There's a spare iPhone that has very kind of lockdown uses, which is usually just to listen to music and to take some photos. So as I say, that big movement to delay, but we still need to develop some of those media literacy and digital wellbeing kind of lessons to help introduce teens into that space and to get them comfy and give them those rehearsal opportunities. Social media, obviously, Snap, TikTok, and Instagram are most popular platforms with Australian teens at the moment. We're probably all quite familiar with the functions here to gather followers, accrue likes and comments. It's not actually about posting a lot. You might see a lot of teenagers especially might have only 6 photos. They might, as they add a photo, delete another photo. It's a lot more about the comments and being in the comments of your friends and being in the message platform. So it's what's happening sometimes behind the scene that's just as important. But that scrolling behavior and the consumption within the feed, because the algorithm determines that. It's taking lots and lots of little data points of how long you watch videos, what you click on, what you don't click on, to build a very, very uh, stringent idea of who you are. And it's the algorithm isn't so interested in me anymore as a kind of perimenopausal white woman. It's kind of like you're done and dusted. But for young people, it really is, an opportunity to get them into that advertising funnel. Because the feed is bottomless. You cannot get to the bottom of it. There's more content than there is moments in the day. The checking and the scrolling becomes automatic in the interstices of, is that the right word? Interstitials, in the gaps of our life. We almost can't spend a moment without checking into our phones. And short form video content is really king in these spaces. So while TikTok is known for the short videos, we know that Instagram stories and reels, YouTube shorts are all mimicking this short form video content. In terms of video gaming, the key popular games are Roblox, which I have to point out is not just a game. It's actually more like Time Zone or an arcade, where you go in and then select an experience to then interact with. And there's millions of these experiences. Many kids are actually building their own experiences within Roblox. Some become really, really popular, so popular that you'll find them in a Happy Meal, a card game within that. That's sort of a spin-off from there. You've got Minecraft and Fortnite. I call those the digital hot chips, like the key things that everyone's consuming and loves. And then there's various console games. So you might play on a Switch or a Nintendo. Switch is Nintendo. A Switch or a PlayStation or a, insert the name of, Commodore 64. If you've still got one, you're probably not playing on those, but you get what I mean. There's different consoles that you can get. These are often more male based, but girls game too. Obviously, boys are on social media as well. There's some really interesting gender patterns within that. This one is recognized as a disorder. So ICD 10 or 11, can't remember which, actually included internet gaming disorder. 3.5% of the population probably meets criteria for this, but 15 to 20% is probably at risk of problematic use. We don't really have that many treatment facilities. So digital nutrition literally started as a prevention for internet gaming addiction, thinking about what different kinds of games and when we play and when we snack and things like that. So there's definitely something in video gaming to be conscious of. And again, without going too deep into this, a lot of it has to do with the reason that kids start gaming seriously. There's usually a kind of catalyst event. There's something that's happened that games become a really powerful coping mechanism for that. Then messenger and messaging generally, and you can message across pretty much all of these platforms across social media and messaging within games. But then you've got specific messenger, kids messenger, WhatsApp, and other platforms like Signal that some kids might move to if they're trying to hide maybe some of their behaviors from parents, and one called Discord, which sort of started off as a gaming chat platform, and now lots of people use it. I know lots of teachers in the pandemic were using Discord servers to chat with their classes, and a lot of different organizations use that. The group chat is a really big thing. It's like, being sitting at town hall steps and being in the in-group. So there's a lot of issues I think that you might find come out of the group chat. There's a lot of potential bullying and ostracism when the main group chat, there becomes splinter groups and side conversations. And really what's going on here is belonging in online spaces is a key driver for the use of these, because we know we like to be included. It feels good to belong and feel connected and be liked. So not wanting to miss out on something, having FOMO or fear of missing out, is actually totally normal and understandable. I think we weaponize FOMO as rather than saying, yeah, we need to belong, we should actually understand that fear of missing out is really kind of key, and we need to kind of look at the drivers of why people would fear that they're being excluded. And we can go back to all of our social psychology from the 80s and 90s, because it still is very predictive of, how to support those kind of feelings. There's also this sense of keeping up with iPhones, which is what I sort of say about how we want to fit in. It often means being invited into the group, having the right social media presence, lots of followers, but not many posts, playing certain games, or having the latest technology. And keeping up to date can be a full-time job. I think that's sort of capitalism at its best, the idea that every year there's a new iPhone that does slightly better, and sometimes actually not better than the last one. There's constant iterations and updates and planned obsolescence. How many different sets of earphones with different connectors do we have across all of the devices? I'm up to 3 different sets of headphones, and obviously can never find the right one when I need them. And obviously a lot of this goes wonky because we've got underdeveloped brains playing in, really complex spaces and interpersonal interactions. What I'd love for us to get out of our head is that they're not digital natives. They do not have the full brain wiring that we would like them to in order to avoid some of the risks and pitfalls in these spaces. Sure, they grew up with digital technologies and they seem like they can use them well, but they're actually more like digital orphans because they're a generation that grew up without a strong level of oversight or supervision. And we're working it out as we go. Many parents that I work with are like, I'm just like building the plane as I fly it in terms of how they're using technology in their home and how they're setting boundaries around it. We actually need to be digital guardians to demonstrate to them that those social emotional skills required to mitigate that risk. And again, a lot of the desires that we have for young people is to have self-control and self-regulation and self-discipline. And the only way they get those things is through experiencing the hard kind of sense of failure and the big feelings and the difficulties of going through those with support and the co-regulation in order to build those skills. So we can't just sort of delay, and then at 16 they jump online and they've got a fully wired up prefrontal cortex that can mitigate all of these risks. It's our job, I think, as digital guardians, whether we're in a classroom or whether they're parents. So there's lots of online harms, I guess. We focus on those harms much more than we focus on the protective factors and the things that it offers. I think, again, without being completely, I don't want to downplay the harms, but I think the way that our media works, the good news story about millions of kids will use the internet without too much trouble doesn't really create a clickbait headline that is going to generate you to look at that and then also get served ads. Again, I probably sound really skeptical at this point, but I think we have to look at the bigger machinations behind what drives news and promotes some of these stories. Young people often don't imagine nefarious people would want to harm them. They don't imagine that there's somebody who's pretending to be their friend who actually might be a predator. They can't believe that somebody who is in their class hates them so much they would create a fake account and say horrible things about them. So when digital dramas occur, they might not feel like they're ready to reach out to a trusted adult, and a situation really spirals. So often what we need to do, that digital guardian piece, is really, really important, because if they think that we are going to judge them or take their phones away or kick them off the internet because something goes awry, they're probably going to hide it from us and things are going to get worse. They might seek help online, but from others, and maybe they call the kids helpline or they call some of the services that are available, but they often kind of can't solve the problems on their own. To some degree, and again, depending on your jurisdiction and where you're kind of coming from, apologies if you are in most of Australia, because you will have found that your school is banning smartphones unless there's a specific need or use for them. Obviously, young people who might have a disability or be using medical devices and things like that might have plans around their use, but most states have followed suit, to my understanding, and most private and independent school kind of organisations have put some restrictions in place. Again, I don't want to seem like totally skeptical, but a lot of people are trying to say, oh, it's been amazingly effective. But if we banned cars and then said, oh my God, there's no accidents, we'd be like, yeah, because you banned cars. So my confusion here is what we're actually benchmarking with bans. Are we benchmarking for attention skills? Are we benchmarking for reduced cyberbullying? Does that then translate into reduced offline bullying? What were the goals here? What were the really specific goals? There was a lot of talk around these, getting young people talking to one another again, face-to-face talking, specifically building social skills. Again, if social skills come with a lot of normative sort of expectations and things like that. So I'll just get you to think about that. I've also put in the handout a link to the initial review into non-educational use of smartphones, which at the time, it was the end of 2018, didn't actually find strong evidence for banning phones. Um, and again, some of the reports are mostly anecdotal around, oh, kids are talking to one another in the playground again. Doesn't mean they're talking nicely to one another. It doesn't mean necessarily they're being besties and, doing their maths homework and discussing philosophy. So we can kind of dig into that a little bit. And then Australia last year passed a social media ban for under 16s. Again, I could really talk for an hour just about this. Enough to say that it's due to come in force in about 6 months in December. It generally, what we're doing at the moment is trialing age assurance technology. That basically means platforms will be forced to use technology to assure that somebody is under 16. The trial at the moment is indicating an 85% effectiveness rate, and it's got lots of biases. So there's a link in the handout which is to an ABC report of kids actually trialing it and looking at the margin of error of, you can imagine a more mature 14-year-old boy with facial hair is then coming in as a 23, 24-year-old compared to a more baby-faced human that then thinks it's 9 or 10. So we're kind of to be continued. Age assurance, to assure that somebody or verify someone's age, you actually have to verify their identity. To verify that I'm not, in fact, any longer under 16, you'd have to verify my age. And to verify my age, you need to verify my identity. And to verify my identity, you're probably looking at feeding your passport data into technology. And we just simply don't trust tech companies enough to give them that. We will give them all of our data over many, many years, but our passport details, no, thank you. So there's a lot of intricacies here. It is going to be a very interesting 6 months to see how this actually rolls out, and the effectiveness. We've moved away from calling it a ban to a delay. And again, there's a lot of stuff going on under the surface, and I can point you to some very interesting investigative reporting around what's really driving this. Because what happens when kids turn 16? You suddenly are 16 and bang, you can go on social media. How are we implementing those training wheels and driving lessons? How do we prepare them to navigate all of these different contexts? And we all need this training, because if you look at the rates of scams for over 65s, these are the kinds of things that we need to have conversations about. There's a really fantastic website called Dodgy or Not, which is all about scams for any age and being able to pick a scam and learn what are the features of scams and scams that are happening. So I put that into the list as well, Dodgy or Not. So what can we learn from water safety? Again, Americans might be really good at the driving stuff. Australia is really good at water safety. We obviously have lots of pools, we have lots of coastline. Many of us get thrown in a swimming pool when we're very little, and we are made to swim. And the way that I learnt to swim starting in 1982 was very, very different to then the kinds of swimming lessons that my daughter got when she was little. So we take a multi-pronged approach to this. Often we are in the pool with our kids from a young age. We are showing them what to do. We focus on safety and those life skills. If you're from Australia, you and you're kind of, grew up in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s, you probably remember the bronze medallion, where we all kind of in year 7 got told to jump in the pool fully clothed and swim 2 laps and swim to survive. We also have a very strong approach to pool fences and legislating for pool safety to make sure that little ones are not getting into these spaces and drowning. We have lifeguards around to help, who can actually swim, who have top level skills. These are progressive, and we learn in various conditions. Swimming in a pool is very different to swimming in a river or swimming in the surf. So again, we can apply this. What we find is actually happening though is that what I would kind of suggest to you is that a social media ban is raising the pool fence. So the current age of social media is 13. It's raising the pool fence to 16, but the actual latch to the pool is going to is still broken. Kids can still easily get around the very fancy high new pool fence that everyone's saying, oh, what a wonderful, first global first banning social media for under 16s, but there's a gaping hole in the fence that we haven't really looked at. So I will stop on my high horse around that, but just leave you with those provocations. Yes, many young people might be protected from having that ban. Many of us work with the kind of kids at the edges who need a much more careful and considered approach. So it's the iPhones, isn't it? Teen screens and their mental health. This is probably, if I had to like have a meme competition of my like rate my favorite memes, this is probably one of my favorites. It's the iPhones, isn't it? Record numbers of teens are depressed and we must find out why. Teens say, well, school is more stressful than ever. Our parents screwed over the economy. The earth is on a path to environmental destruction. And now we have to deal with actual Nazis. And this is probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. You can kind of, take out that last bit and put in any new part of the poly crisis that is unraveling. And adults go, it's the iPhones, isn't it? So I don't think it's actually the iPhones. There's a lot of other social and contextual things that are happening that do make online spaces sort of the refuge from it all. Here's a quick media literacy activity. I especially like that first headline. Giving your child a smartphone is like giving them a gram of cocaine, says top addiction expert. Now, I'm not sure who did the research there to work out how much a gram of cocaine, like how pure is that cocaine? Like how did they dose that into the child? How did they map their brain? I think some of these headlines really go for the clickbait. It's digital heroin, how screens turn kids into psychotic junkies. Again, cocaine and heroin, very, very different drugs. How pure is the like? There's so many questions that we have when we see these things. And again, these are from, you can see here Nicholas Kardashis. He's written another book more recently, 2016, banning children as young as 4 from the internet is like child abuse, claims controversial professor. So there's some really kind of key things to dig into to, try and navigate through some of this. We can think about, well, what's all the fuss? And it really is about brain development, because we know they're in such a critical phase of brain development that actually goes on until they're about 25. There's a, period of developmental sensitivity at 19, for instance. We get one shot at wiring our brain up, and yes, our brains are plastic, but it's better to kind of wire up well that first time rather than needing remediation of our neural pathways. Because brains and well-being are really, really central to kind of understanding that youth mental health crisis. 10% of brain development, the final part of brain development, 10%, takes about 20 years. And these are the highly complex wiring up of emotional and higher order thinking skills, those social emotional skills and higher order thinking. So by the time you're 5, 90% of your brain's done. It's that really complex final bit and the big emotions and learning to deal with those emotions in we know that kids are accessing tech earlier and for longer and longer periods of time in more immersive ways. So we know that there are going to be changes to the way that those inputs shape our our language we see with little ones, our social emotional awareness and ability to regulate. What I would suggest we want to do is fact up, not freak out. There's a lot of rhetoric here. A lot of it is doom and gloom. We offer some 4 new norms, which sometimes are very come from a place of quite a lot of privilege. We know that we don't learn in fear as well. So often, I mean, I don't do student presentations anymore, but often, you know, some of the presentations around digital safety, especially, really freak parents out. But we don't learn or take effective action when we're in that space. So getting into a more empowered space to you know make changes is what I suggest we do. And these books really shaped the conversation. Jean Twenge's book iGen, and then it's got a big long title in 2019. Her work, and she does work closely with Jonathan Haidt, who then released The Anxious Generation, is now you know 18 months or more ago, really have shaped the conversations around tech in schools, smartphone free childhood, the four new norms that he suggests, and the banning of devices in the US that I think is slowly rolling out. If you did read those books, my antidote books here, and again, they're in the handout, Kath Nibbs, or Dr. Catherine Nibbs, I should say, Tech Smart Parenting, Professor Pete Etchell's, his Unlocked Real Science of Screen Time, Jordan Shapiro's The New Childhood is epic, and Ash Brandis, Power On. Their book is coming out in October, so you can pre-order Power On. Ash has been a teacher for 13 years. They're over in the US. I can't remember what state. They're on Instagram as the Gamer Educator, and they are epic. You know, look, I love their approach. I'm so glad all of these people have written books, so then I can get out of having to write one for now. The research, I think we have to kind of keep in mind, parents want practical strategies, not statistical gymnastics, but they also want quick fixes. So a lot of the research, it might freak you out, but it's really early days with this research, and a lot of the methodology is really shambolic. So I just kind of encourage people, without going into too much depth on like what it all means, because we're not here for like stats 101, just to kind of remind you that when we're looking at a lot of this research, it's based on self-report of time online. Right now, I'm looking at my clock now and looking at like how long we've been talking and things, and it's like, wow, there's, you know, my ability to track time at 47 is still really bad. I can't imagine that kids are very good at estimating this. It's really hard to get ethics approval to look at kids' brains, to put kids into, you know, MRI machines and dose them up with technology. It's hard to dose people with the same amount of technology and the same kinds of technology or social media. So there's a really big problem with the way that we actually research this to begin with. And we'll look at kind of the digital nutrition aspects of it. It gets really overblown negatively by the media. Because and you know, I think it's important just to look at concepts of good science. Correlation is not causation. Okay. The little graph down there, Internet Explorer use versus murder rate, they are actually beautifully correlated, but no one would say, oh, when we stop using Internet Explorer as our web browser and we use Chrome, we murder less people, right? That would make no sense. And that, you know, there's lots of examples like that where we can map patterns and we know that they're not causative. The plural of anecdote is not data. So we need to be aware of confirmation bias, because we see people around using screens. We make a lot of judgments about, you know, that they're wasting time, that they're lazy, that they're, you know, engaging in brain rot, when it could be a lot of other things. That we don't cherry pick results. So often there's huge data sets, people go in and they look for particular ways that data has been, you know, particular, you know, areas that then can be written up. And what we want to do instead is pre-register our research. So you actually have to say what you're looking for before you go looking, not the other way around. And we need to look at the sample size, that when it's very small, we need to interpret with caution. So there was a big study that was done recently by MIT that showed people who use ChatGPT to write their essay had a cognitive decline of 47%. Everyone was like freaking out about this. The sample size was 18. Okay, so we need to look at some of the details within this. When we look at digital citizenship, this is a model from 2011. I love this model because it really kind of gives you the sense that it's a world that cyber safety and cyberbullying was sort of central to this, but there's other aspects that sit around it and things that we need to think about. Digital health and wellbeing down there at the bottom is really where my work sits. And digital wellbeing generally is about people's mental, physical, and social emotional strategies to improve how they interact with digital devices and services. We can look at this from a variety of levels, from personal use to organizational use, and a combination, because it's all obviously overlapping. I really like the DQ model. So this is the digital intelligence model out of Singapore and the DQ Institute. Again, I'm going to link to a lot of this so you can like dive in if you want more. I'm giving you just, I guess, some broad brushstrokes of the ways and the frameworks that are being used and are available if you were to implement some of this more specifically. Even thinking about a digital wellbeing impact scale. So just like we would think about mental health generally, from flourishing to languishing or mental illness, we can think about digital flourishing, wellbeing, resilience, vulnerability, problematic use, and pathological overuse, and how that is then impacting across that spectrum. Again, I'm just giving you broad brushstrokes for now. I'll introduce you to my digital nutrition philosophy, which is really digging into that little area. It's about de-guilting your tech use so that you can master your tech habits, to be well and connected and stay human in a digitally colonized world. And it started with boys and gaming. Again, this is probably my second most favorite meme. Mum said, go play outside. So he took his entire gaming console outside. This is a huge source of conflict in families around screen time and the use of games, the type of game, the fact that a lot of games are really hard to finish. They don't have an endpoint. It's not like watching a 7-minute episode of Bluey or a 25-minute episode of Big Bang Theory. Many approaches, I noticed were about restrictions without lessons. So it kicked off from there. Most simply, it's just about using a food analogy as a practical framework for improving our well-being, preventing those digital disorders and managing our screen-based media use, because we all eat and we all hopefully enjoy food and have a healthy relationship with food. And we've done a lot of work on this. So it's hopefully a sustainable and practical approach that sits between digital abstinence and digital addictions. So I do acknowledge that, I guess, I'm not here to try and fight the tech bros. I don't have enough energy left for that. It's about a personal response to taking back our attention to become aware and informed about the impacts. And I guess the part of me that's still a Year 9 commerce teacher that would say, that first lesson, let the buyer beware, or caveat emptor, we need to be conscious consumers and ask the right questions to protect young people's mental health. Because screen-based media use is not one thing. So we call it screen time. That's a terrible name for it. It should be screen-based media use. It's not one thing. It's a million things. We don't sit down and have food time. We don't have dinner and say, okay, 20 minutes of food time. Once you've had 20 minutes, it's all over. I'm taking your plate away. We actually look at what people are consuming, what's on their plate, how much of, the protein they've eaten. Have you eaten your broccoli? Etc. So we can think about it when you see somebody, on their phone pushing their pram. What you haven't seen maybe is a range of things across the day that people are engaging with their kids. There was some, parents on their phone backlash a couple of years in the pandemic that this cartoon from Commonwealth came from. So my suggestion, and again, you'll get all of these resources, is to go beyond screen time, because screen time can be a really simplistic and outdated way of thinking about this. We want to look at the content, like actually what are you consuming? You're watching YouTube. What are you watching on YouTube? What did you learn from that? Who was the person who shared that? What was their intention for that? And while we might not do that for every 15-second video that we watch, we might want to think about, setting that up as some of the curious questioning that we can ask around it. Is it developmentally appropriate? That's probably the easiest thing that we're not doing is asking parents whether or not they even had a look at the age rating for a game. Kids under 18 playing Grand Theft Auto. We're still waiting for Grand Theft Auto 6 to come out, and it'll be very interesting to see what they've done to kind of, or if anything, to support age appropriate play. Those games that are 18 plus, if you're not 18, it's a really simple conversation, or it should be a simple conversation around maybe considering whether or not that's something you want your 8-year-old to play. The context and the situation that the tech use is occurring in is really important as well. So, I go back to winter in the pandemic. We were on our screens a lot, and that situation was probably a godsend at the time. But if you're in summer and you're at the beach, being on devices might not be the most appropriate thing, except maybe it's so hot and climate change is so significant that we actually can't go out in the middle of the day like we used to. Certainly without the sunscreen that I grew up not wearing. And then the cognitions, like what are we actually thinking about? What are our intentions and motivations? How are we processing the information that we're seeing? Certainly young women and body image content can be something here that we could look at if we dose 2 15-year-olds with the same sort of Instagram visual content. Are they thinking adaptive things? Are they able to go, oh, that's AI generated, or that has been completely airbrushed? Are we able to separate that out and kind of, again, that's a bit of a media literacy activity there in order to ensure our thoughts are adaptive? And then finally, what is the function or the reason for the tech use? Are we using it to avoid social interaction? Are we using it to study? There's a variety of functions within why we use technology that are worth examining. If you are what you eat, then how does what you scroll through and you consume through devices impact your emotion and thinking? Are we eating mentally what are we eating mentally when we spend hours a day each day placing attention on devices and on our feeds, and suddenly you'll probably see there's lots and lots of food analogies here with technology. What's the impact of this over time? Well, we're going to find out because we're in a little bit of an experiment. I developed this because I thought digital detoxing sounded really annoying, and turns out that it doesn't actually work. There's more and more research on digital detoxing, and unless you have a plan on how you're going to re-enter after having some time away from technology, you are most likely going to create the binge and purge cycles that you had to begin with, because we haven't addressed the underlying psychological needs and reasons for being there. So I would love for people to remove digital detoxing and digital native from their vocabularies and think of it as kind of fasting, or think of it as, curating what you're consuming so that you can get away from the kind of fad dieting sort of behaviors and shape behavior in a more long-term way. I think a lot of people are counting digital calories. They're focusing on time online, but that's not actually giving us that whole picture. Time is still really useful, so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a really easy metric to map, but 1 minute of really highly distressing content can have really significant ramifications for people when things go viral, when there's really big horrible events that sometimes very quickly spread around social and online spaces. So we all only have 24 hours in the day. How are we spending that? We can only spend our time once, but we can refocus our attention at different times. Maybe we could have nutritional labels for apps and games. There's a lot of calls to have more transparency with algorithms, how it's designed, and demand more ethical principles. This might be like nutritional labels that we can consult and understand, and certainly an activity that I can share that you run with your students is just to think about what are the different virtual vitamins that are contained within apps and games, and to get them to actually think about when they're playing a game, what are they getting out of it, and to kind of do a little activity to create these virtual vitamins and to think about what a nutritional label would look like. So I've got a little, I spoke at Twitter headquarters in 2016, quite pregnant at the time. That's how I remember when it was, all about virtual vitamins and introducing virtual vitamins. That's, proteins are the play, vitamin E for empathy, vitamin C for creativity. And again, kids can come up with their own version of that. There we go. I've already jumped ahead. Proteins of the play, we can consider macros, nutrients and minerals. We also need to think maybe about highly processed food and the role of junk food. So, AI maybe is the highly processed digital content. The junk foods might be shallow content, poor information sources. They're designed to be kind of attention hijacking and to use clickbait tactics. They can be grinding or use repetitive tasks that don't build new skills. So something like Pokemon Go, sometimes you just have to be in the gym in order to build some of your skills. They can have simplistic game design or lack narrative. They are more about consumption than creation, and can be mindless with the intention of escape rather than being really mindful. But superfoods can be using platforms for connecting and learning, not escape and coping, when the thoughts and feelings about the activities are positive and constructive, and can be pro-social or serious games that have complex narratives and the variety of collaborative and problem-solving skills that are being built. You can watch my TEDx talk from 2015, sometime like that. I can't believe that's 10 years ago. Where I talk about indie games as digital superfoods and the opportunity that they present to actually really up-level some of our collaborative skills. And as I say, watch out for the ultra-processed AI-driven content. We definitely need some AI labels for that. We're on a social media sushi train a lot of the time. So how do we get off that? How do we kind of really notice when we're mentally full, that we're not kind of just, accustomed to snacking all day long, because there's a lot of just junk going round and round, because it's priming our brains to want to go hunting for sweet dopamine mental treats. And again, the role of dopamine, probably outside what you need today, but, we can go down another rabbit hole about the role of dopamine in online activities. There is no single healthy digital diet or wellbeing plan. People always want, like, what is the approach? And I'm like, well, we have to really look at parameters around your age, your neurotype, your preferences. Gender's probably going to feed into it. The offline activities that you already do, because this is not just about tech habits. It's about your offline life and actually stopping the digital displacement or the displacement of technology into things like sleep and movement. So please don't ask me how many minutes of screen time is healthy. Our nutritional needs change over time too. So toddlers have really different diets to teenagers or athletes, and we want to slowly and intentionally introduce tech use as needed, not by default. So as I say, delay is the way to go. It's not as simple as things that you're doing on your laptop for school are the broccoli, and things that you do on your smartphone are the digital candy, because often it's a bowl of broccoli and candy mixed in together. In 1994, I was probably passing notes, or I was actually passing notes in class. Kids don't need to pass notes. They're just in Google Docs, sharing information with one another. I've worked with kids who have written 40,000 word fan fiction outlines. That was just the outline for the fan fiction they were writing. So we need to be clear that we're asking kids to actually sidestep all of the tempting things in order to engage with the learning. And that's really, really hard for a developing brain. So what are some skills for digital wellbeing in the classroom? Well, obviously, again, I don't want to tell people how to design lessons. I don't want to tell people how to work with educational psychology around, cognitive load and processing speed and working memory and things like that. I'm definitely not taking my own medicine here because I've probably, given you way too much information, and the feedback will be too much information, not enough practical things. There are practical activities and reflection activities that you can take away and do. But here's sort of some things to consider. Is just making sure that kids have, if you even if young people are using their laptops and school-based laptops and things, have they actually wrangled notifications and optimized the features so that they can corral their access? Do they know how to use some of the inbuilt features that are, school approved? If you're a Microsoft school or a Google school or whatever, are you using those things, those inbuilt features to actually support healthy habits? Out of sight, out of mind, getting space from devices. So sometimes it's a tech-free lesson, and we'll talk about handwriting and the importance of that. Using the functions within the apps to shape the habits and doing a bit of a digital declutter. And there's a range of ways to do that. Another really simple thing that we can do, everyone in all classrooms can do, is really check for posture and check for moving our eyes around and not just staring at screens. So there's this 20-20-20 principle that 60-20-20 would do. For every 20 minutes of looking at screens, look at something 20 meters away and blink 20 times. So we're not designed to sit as much as we are. And then when we are sitting, the ergonomics is really not great. So we can really take some control around that and have some brain breaks and neck breaks and all of those. Not neck breaks, let's not break our neck, but check our posture. I don't think, if you're a physiotherapist or ergonomic consultant, you would never be out of work while people are constantly cranking their neck down to look at devices. Generally, in presentations, I go through these 5 digital dilemmas. They're highly interrelated and overlapping. If I was better at graphic design, I would have made a model of these better. But for now, even though that they relate and interconnect, they're distraction, dependence, displacement, the data deluge, and drama. The 2 ones we're going to mainly look at are distraction and the data deluge because they're things that I think impact students the most, but we'll touch upon some of the others. Distraction probably is that biggest one, as I say. I think what we need to do here is make sure we understand cognitive load theory and take brain breaks. We can teach attention management strategies and executive functioning skills, not just to the kids who might have deficits because of ADHD diagnoses. I think to some degree, all of us have attention management problems because we're feeding and training our brains on short form video content. And just summarized information rather than long form. We really need to support monotasking and teach some of the skills behind that. Getting out of sight, out of mind for devices and creating that analog space to do some activities like handwriting notes and mind mapping. When I was teaching in literally 2005 for year 8 geography, we actually went back to handwritten projects, assignments. One, because it was helping kids practice their actual handwriting. 2, because they were just cutting and pasting things off the internet. And back then we didn't have Turnitin or anything like that to check what they were doing. You could just tell because sometimes they hadn't even bothered to format the data, the fonts. So, finding ways to actually build some of the different skills that we need in an offline way. We know the research points to when you handwrite notes, you have more ownership, your brain remembers it better. That there's a range of reasons why we would encourage that. And certainly in Australia, if you do your HSC, the high school certificate, or your year 12 kind of leaving certificate, before you go to college or uni, or tertiary level education, it's still handwritten. So if you're doing some of the social sciences, to get the highest level band, a band 6, you need to be able to write really legibly and write really quickly and have the stamina for writing essays, let alone the skills to write essays. So we do need to then connect back into some of those analog skills. connecting with a desired feeling of completing the set goal. And I'm going to speak to that in a minute. Helping teens understand their neurobiology and actually what's going on for them. Research shows that you explaining to a kid how their memory works, what happens when you sleep is super, super powerful for them, because then they want to take autonomy over it. When I explain to young people that TikTok is literally, they are paying TikTok with their attention, and they're not getting paid, they start to get really pissed about that. And they start thinking about what deserves their time and attention. So I encourage you, again, depending on your KLA, if you're teaching biology, teaching neurobiology might not feel like a big step. If you're teaching maths, this might feel really like, what? How do I do that? And again, you don't need to be a neuroscientist. You can just give really simple examples of what's happening in your brain when you learn, how that storage is happening from short-term to long-term memory and the retrieval processes that happen. We can become indistractable. This is a really sometimes handy model here from Nir Eyle's 2019 book, that you can take an action and it can move you in one of two ways. It can build traction with the stuff that you really want, or it can distract you and move you away from what you really want. And this was really, again, from that kind of neurobiology perspective, you just give kids a bit of choice theory to understand, which way do I want to go? Why am I choosing distraction? In fact, this model gets a little bit more complicated because there's internal and external triggers. But I just start with this really simple explanation. And again, it'll be in your handout. We want to monotask like a ninja and learn to do deep work again, getting away from that getting back to monotasking and away from the lots of attention or constant partial attention to lots of different sources, but not going deeply. So deep work is a concept from Cal Newport, whose books are amazing. We really want to learn to be able to do distraction-free concentration that push you to the limit of your cognitive skills. And concentrate, because I think concentration is a 20-second superpower. You've probably all seen the creator, collaborator, communicator, critical thinker, 21st century skill model. I add another one in there of concentration or concentrator. And again, not just kids with ADHD or, diagnoses, but everyone could do with learning these. And again, I've put links to, some great starting places for teaching executive functioning. We want to connect with a future self, and getting beyond goal setting, actually a core desired feeling. How do we want to feel? What is the feeling on when we've finished this assignment? What does it feel like when we don't pull an all-nighter to do the geography assignment? And this is not about getting a thing, but as I say, how you feel. And it's a kind of future self exercise to think about when I am, I don't know, the netball, the netball captain, or our netball season is finished and we've won, how does that feel? And then working towards it, because this is really, really key. Having a vision of yourself in the future is absolutely key to developing self-control. You are not going to put off something in the future if you haven't felt like you're not going to put off something in the immediate. You're not going to stop scrolling if you don't have a sense of yourself in the future that you want to look forward to. That can be a key aspect to actually developing self-control. When we think about antidotes to dependence, again, I'm not saying that, we're becoming, like, dependence is a really tricky word, because we are dependent on our devices. We are dependent on laptops to maybe teach. What would happen in a classroom when the internet goes down or the power is out and people's batteries run out? So we do kind of create a certain reliance. Do we have like backup systems for when that happens? Again, teaching the neurobiology of dependence and addiction and what's happening with things like dopamine reward pathways can be really useful, as well as building key psychological nutrients. So we're going to have a look at that within your lessons, being able to differentiate and accommodate to make sure that kids actually are working at their ability level. So the antidote for addiction is usually connection, because are we actually addicted to the device, or are we addicted to getting the connection and the community that we get from screens, from, playing a game and having a competence around that in a way that you might not have competence in English or maths or something like that. Again, we come back here to community, belonging, inclusion, socializing, identity development. All of these things happen in online spaces really, really powerfully, because they can meet our needs for connection, competence, and control really well. So these are our basic psychological nutrients. This comes from self-determination theory, a very, very watertight theory of human motivation, where the epitome of human motivation is intrinsic motivation, that internal drive to do things because they feel good, not because I'm being extrinsically rewarded by, if I unpack the dishwasher, I get 20 minutes on Roblox. So I have a whole course on this where it digs into what these are, how they're met online, and then how to build those in the real world, inverted commas, real world. But these are, even the idea of giving kids choice or control over what activity they might do in your classroom can really build their sense of engagement in it, rather than here's the one sheet that everyone does. Here's the different areas. You maybe have to do them all by the end of the week, but you get to choose which one you do first, or which 3 out of 5 you do, etc. And doing the big rocks first. Many of us, probably if you've ever worked in a productivity workshop, have learnt about the big rocks. So making sure that sleep, school, and sport are the big rocks that are put in first into the jar. The pebbles are the extracurricular activities, and screen use for fun is the sand. If we don't put the big rocks in first, it's going to overflow and you're not going to get those big rocks. They're not going to all fit. So just some of these sort of philosophies and ideas that you can reinforce, again, in any classroom or any activity, can be helpful. And I think I've spoken a little bit about understanding self-control. It's really a complex skill. It requires you to have that thing in the future worth delaying gratification for. And it's this battle between the limbic system of, like, instant gratification and those dopamine reward pathways, and the prefrontal cortex, which makes the good choice. It's really hard sometimes to make that good choice if your entire friendship group is on the other side of a device. And you don't have that sense of, like, if I do this now, then I'm potentially giving up the things that I really want in the future. Works with money as well, right? So yes, maybe you can buy that Labubu doll now, but that's going to impact our ability to maybe go on a big family holiday down the track. Antidotes to displacement. Time is a non-renewable resource, and I hope everyone's calling out bingo there, but your focus and energy can be replenished. We want to use that healthy mind platter, and again, that'll be in your list. I'm going to make sure that I do actually include that, to create an optimum life blend. That comes from Dan Siegel, and again, many of you will have seen it. You can, again, think about how that might integrate into planning for a term or a semester. Setting a digital sunset. And again, that might be a little bit outside our role, like when kids go to bed, not necessarily our job, but the psychoeducation around our need for sleep can be. And setting limits and using tools within apps and devices, they're already there. There was some new research that showed a lot of the tools parents just aren't using. And again, maybe that's the same or similar for teachers, that there's certain features within whatever your school is using that you're not fully aware of and deploying, and maybe that is a really quick win. As I say, sleep maybe not your jam. Maybe this is not something that you feel like you need to talk to kids about, but helping them understand that sleep deprivation impacts what I call the 3 M's: mood, memory, and metabolism. Super simple way for them to break down, oh, it makes me grumpy, it makes it stops my learning being encoded into long-term memory stores. That can really mess up the way that my body processes energy. Leads to a whole range of different conditions there when we have, like, ongoing sleep deprivation. And sleep actually is a process that helps sort information from the kind of messy desk or the lots of post-it notes into these beautiful filing cabinets. So when you have a topic test or end of semester exam, you can pull out the information and answer the question. thinking actually has exhaust fumes. When the process of us thinking and going through our day, there are these exhaust fumes that then need to be washed out of our brain through a thing called the lymphatic drainage system. Kids love knowing this stuff, the idea that sleep is actually a cleaning system and that they've got too much junk in their brain literally is leading to some of those feelings that they really don't love having, right? Kids hate being moody and grumpy, those slower reactions, everything just feels really hard. We hate that too. And so hopefully this maybe is inspiring you to get a bit more sleep. With the data deluge, we've got the FOMO and the JOMO. So rather than having fear of missing out, we can find a joy in missing out, and certainly realizing that we can't consume all of the memes, we can't watch all of the TV shows, that we have to have priorities. It can be, a really big lesson for kids. And we want to do it all and have it all. Talking to young people about creating compacts with their friends about their intentions. So I often work with peer groups to come up with new rules for the group chat. Like anyone who posts in the group chat after 10 p.m. Or doesn't reply in the group chat after 10 p.m. kind of can't be kicked out of the group for not participating because they're actually in bed or their families have rules and things like that. So just kind of having these agreements rather than contracts. Asking kids the question, what's worth your time and what's worth your attention, because there's so much information to consume. That we're trying to make sure that we can fact check and well, not that we're doing the fact checking, but curating sources of quality and fact check news and information. A recent study showed that more Americans now get their news from social media than they do from news websites. And certainly in Australia, AAP are closing down their fact-checking service. So that will not happen across Australian Associated Press anymore, which is kind of frightening, really, given that we haven't spent and invested a lot in media literacy. And we can then apply the 4 M's of mindful, meaningful, moderate, and role modeled. That's missing there, but you're going to get a copy of that. There's this mismatch between our brains and the modern environment, because our brains are, literally designed to eat berries in a cave, and we're processing non-stop 24/7 onslaught of information. So we need to turn off the information fire hose. There's just so much information being smashed into our brains. We need to be really, really conscious of creating that news diet, knowing when to log out and step back from doom scrolling, because we can't read the entire internet. Noticing that feeling of mental fullness. Even at the start of classes, you can be doing little check-ins, some little belly breathing, some sort of centering activities. It can take 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be, a full mindfulness thing. It's just noticing how much information is sort of blasting into our brains and how many mental tabs we have open. Oh, they should be the other way around. This is the developing media literacy. The getting information off the internet is like taking a drink from a fire hydrant. How do we actually appraise this information? Again, that's a whole nother area that maybe your school is investing in some of the specific programs around mis, and disinformation across, the way that news is presented. And we all need it. Finally, I'm going to go a little bit over time, but that's okay. Antidotes to digital dramas. These are all the social, emotional, and personal dramas that come up. And again, many of these might happen outside of your classroom, outside of the school, yet they're brought into these spaces. Look, these are complex because a lot of what happens, the dramas that happen in online spaces are happening in offline spaces as well. And they're all about the social emotional skills. And that's their specific lessons, right? Social emotional learning, CEL, is a really huge area that needs to be implemented. And this is kind of just a bit of a layer on top of that. But again, getting enough sleep, a lot of the dramas that happen do happen late at night when kids really should be in bed and are saying things online because they haven't really thought it through. There is a digital disinhibition effect that because when we behave differently online, because we're not actually looking at one another, we're typing into a screen, we forget that there's actually somebody on the other side that's going to kind of experience what shows up. So eye contact usually kickstarts kindness when we're not having that same level of eye contact and we're just tapping into a keyboard or a screen, then things go wonky. And there's, again, a whole bunch of research that sits behind digital disinhibition. Here are the 4 M's. They'll be in your handout. So, don't worry too much about the QR code there, but I'll link to that in your handout that comes through. These are mindful, meaningful, moderate, and modeled. And it's kind of like putting digital sunscreen on. Like before you go out in the sun, you get ready to be in the sun. So before you go into online spaces, you kind of think about these ideas, being mindful and being really present. Having meaning, engaging in things that are meaningful, moderating the time online and as well as what you say, and modeling good habits. Now, that's a huge amount and kind of like, oh, I'm 1 minute under. I guess what I wanted to say is that, if you want specific lessons or support in making specific lessons or working out how this fits into your program, I can kind of support you with that. But I don't want to kind of design up like how to do things because of how different everyone's contexts are. You'd have to do that in lots of different ways. Sometimes, though, what's missing is systemic changes. So, you might be doing a lot of wonderful things in your classroom and promoting all of the best kind of conversations and habits and future thinking and all of that stuff. But what might be missing is a whole school approach. So I just wanted to kind of touch very quickly, and it literally be about 3 minutes, on some of the things that we can do to implement student voice and then co-design principles, and then what that might look like in whole school programs based on student and carer and parent feedback. A lot of the time with these sort of issues, whether it's consent education, respectful relationships, digital wellbeing, cyberbullying, there's a guest speaker who rocks in, and like, I admit I used to be that person. Sometimes I get 20, 45, maybe 45 minutes to build a relationship, get kids to listen to me, and then convince them that they should go to bed more and not look at their phone. And I stopped doing that work because I couldn't actually measure whether or not anyone listened and anyone changed their behaviors based on that. And I couldn't any longer just rock up and then kind of fly in, fly out, take the money from the school and not be curious to see whether or not that had impacts. So, and that's not to diss on anyone who does do that work, but when often I didn't get more than an hour versus some of the programs that do day-long like deep dives where you can build those relationships, I couldn't keep doing that. So what I think is much better is implementing really significantly and purposefully participation of young people in designing some of the things that impact them. So if you're not familiar with Roger Hart's ladder of young people's participation, this is from 1992. It was a UNICEF Innocentia paper from 92. UNICEF and Innocentia do incredible work. And it really kind of gives us a sense of like, where are young people actually participating in decisions that impact them? And, when it comes to designing digital wellbeing programs, it's actually the kids who are most likely to breach the rules that I want to work with and that I want to help me design. What are the consequences? What should be the policy? How should we implement things based on those kids, not necessarily the kids who are part of the SRC or the kids who are doing really well and are probably going to follow the rules. I want the larrikins and those kids kind of at risk and on the margins to have a very significant role in designing this. So again, I linked to Roger Hart. You can have a think about where your school and within your classroom, where you might actually be able to move kids up the ladder from tokenism to citizenship. And apologies for this graphic. I didn't have time to make it look prettier. But the idea here is to go from youth voice and asking young people about their views and consulting them on what they think, to then co-designing with them, so them being central to how we design a solution, within the limits. We provide scope and all of those sorts of things, but we design that and validate it with them, and they input the design stage, and then the co-production, so they're involved throughout. This is the kind of ideal. And an example that I give you with this, I work with the team at Project Rocket, which is Australia's youth-driven movement against bullying, hate and prejudice. And I'm like the research assistant to the young people in the Youth Advisory Committee. This is a group of young people who are paid by different organisations who come in and actually want to listen to young people. So they have a voice. We co-design. Tomorrow night I will do a co-design program with them on a sleep challenge that they're designing. They have all sorts of ideas about what would improve their sleep, and I'm there as like the research assistant to design what they suggest. Based on them being the kind of giving the foundations of what they want to do. And then we'll co-produce that. So some of them will make videos, some of them will design things up. I will provide the kind of science advisory, and then we actually produce a range of resources for Project Rocket and the Telstra Foundation's sleep study. So that's a quick example. You could be doing that in your school around the sustainability plan, or a digital wellbeing framework, for instance. So that I just thought was useful, because many teachers might feel like, well, I'm just a classroom teacher, what can I do? And sometimes, unless you want a whole bunch of other work, and that gets quite complicated. There are other things. And if you're a leader already and you want more, ideas about how to do that, again, please feel free to get in touch and we can explore what that might look like. So I lied. I said it would be 3 minutes. It was 5. Hopefully the takeaway messages are simply that digital wellbeing is a really key component of overall health in modern life. Participatory models, where we get in and we actually are involved and we learn and we have a say and we make mistakes that both mitigate risk but prepare young people to navigate these complex digital terrains, is everyone's business, but it is complex and messy work. Prohibition never really worked for abstinence for sex or prohibition of alcohol. We really need to learn from some of those things. There's many ways we can implement digital wellbeing strategies. We just have to get curious and spend some time. So we'll jump into questions. There's lots of ways you can work with me. Digital nutrition on Instagram, unironically. And you can, get in touch via email if you do have more questions outside the session. So, that was epic.
Great.
Sorry.
No, that was fantastic. So much
Too
information in there
much,
and stuff
but
to think about.
yeah.
I'm going to stop the slide presentation so we can focus on our conversation. I'd like to
It's
remind
okay.
everybody that they can post questions for Jocelyn in the chat and the Q&A button. I'll get us kicked off. Can you elaborate? What are some signs you think we should look for that a student's digital habits may be negatively affecting their mental or emotional well-being?
Yeah, I guess it depends on a range of factors. So not coming to school would be one of them, right? Not making it to school, regularly being late. Often kids are staying up vamping. Like they're staying online really late. They might be vaping while vamping, with some of them as well. So look, it generally when we assess for actual problematic use, we're using the criteria that we would use for gambling. So do you have to spend more time online to get the same kind of hit? Like there's withdrawal effects, there's hiding your use from other people, the tolerance, there's a range of different things that we could be looking at. But it might be something as simple as you're not doing the exercise that you used to do, and it's kids get older, they often drop some of their sporting activities because they're focusing on their study. If that's really dropping off, if they're suddenly not engaging in the things that we know used to make them really happy, that might be a sign of it. But it really depends on the kid and the bigger context rather than there just be like one simple thing. It could be something as simple as their sleep is being really impacted, and that's a relatively easy thing to start working on.
Okay, thank you. Justin asks, how would you differentiate chemically addictive, i.e., alcohol, nicotine, versus
Mm.
behaviorally addictive, like dopamine reward from gaming,
Yeah, literally
etc.?
the source, right?
Right.
So, behavioral addictions like gambling are very different to substance use and misuse. And the pathways, I think Mental Health Academy actually have a behavioral addiction
You
certification
do.
course that people could do. So, um, like how it really is the source of that interaction, okay, and getting to the bottom of it. Even within technology, if it's gaming, we would look at what within gaming are you actually creating that addiction to? Is it that you don't know how to be like your brain is so used to that high stimulation and it's not just dopamine, it's a whole range of other complex interactions within your brain where you do feel that purpose. You do feel like it might be the only thing in your life that you're actually really good at. Your whole community might be there observing you get better and better and better and giving you positive feedback in a way that you don't get in the classroom or in the playground. So it's usually about yeah, the impacts of that. It does get to the point, and again, depending on the kind of etiology or the pathway of that developing, it can just be like your brain wiring is like plugged into uh, that need for high level stimulation. Um, there are some examples of children being born kind of early in the pandemic or just before the pandemic who have been kind of growing up in lockdown with parents who may have had really limited capacity to be able to look after them. That screens were the kind of digital pacifier, and now at 6, 7, 8 years old, they're really plugged into screens to the degree that they're not actually turning up to school, and we're having to do big interventions to try and get them out of the home and get them into school because they missed preschool and all of those things. So they're some of the really tricky stories. That's, as I say, not many of them, and I do recognise that there's lots of really big problems with screens for that small proportion of people.
Hmm. Um, in your work, what have you found to be the some of the most effective ways to get uh, student buy-in on this, on intentionality and digital, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
nutrition? I
Ask
know
them.
that trying to get my kids to do what I say doesn't always work. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I think the whole asking young people and positioning them as experts in their lives is a really powerful approach. Um, I know stuff about brains and people. I have many more years of experience on the planet, but their experience of being them is 1 in 8.1 billion. So when we sort of ask them, what do you think about this? Have you considered this? Here's some things I notice as, as an old lady, what are you noticing? And what would you like to know? I often say to young people, I would hate for you to wake up when you're 21 and say, why didn't anyone explain this to me? Um, so what are some of the things that I can maybe shine a light on that you can take some action on and you can choose what you do with that information? A lot of the time, just giving kids information and saying, I'm not here to tell you to do X, Y, and Z. I'm here to tell you A, B, and C so that you can make your own decision. And you need to think about the implications of that and what are the consequences, natural consequences, and then enforced consequences.
okay. You spoke on this a little bit. You were talking about group chats and things and having some rules about them, like
Mhm,
after 10 p.m.,
mhm.
you can't be kicked out of the group. How do you get student buy-in on that? And I don't know, what are the obstacles to that? Like, is that coming from you? Is that coming from the students setting that? How?
So yeah, I mean, it usually comes up because something's gone wrong, right? We're
Mm,
not very good at proactively saying, "Oh, this group chat, proverbial could hit the fan," because we all have underdeveloped brains, and there's a whole bunch of social psychology dynamics that are probably going to kick off, right? So usually something goes wrong, like somebody feels really, really upset. They come to the school counselor or they come to their, favorite teacher, and they go, "I'm really bummed because." I've been ostracized, I've been left out of this group chat and blah, blah, blah. And so we then might actually say, hey, so what do you think we could do? What would be a fair kind of way to address that? What's something that you feel that you then could we go back to this friendship group and see if we could kind of find a solution? Do you think you could do that yourself, or would you like me to support you with that? Um, it can be that we just kind of out of nowhere have like a chat about the group chat. Um, and sometimes kids are like really sus to it. It's like, oh, okay, this is because that thing happened over there. And again, I would just kind of go back to kids about like what works for them, and not like they have free reign, like they are calling the complete shots. But as we know with kind of bullying interventions, when we get in the when we try and kind of iron things out, we make it worse because we're not aware of some of those dynamics. So sometimes being really guided by young people and what they think they need, which is a solution, not just I'll just leave it and hope for the best, right? Sometimes like, oh, just don't worry about it. I've told you now, I feel better. It's like, well, no, that's not actually a full solution, but I'm glad you feel better from talking to me. I really want to reinforce how good it feels to talk to somebody about a problem.
mm. Um, and how do we? It seems like a lot of what you're talking about is making this is integrating it right into classrooms and things. So,
Yeah.
um, how do we integrate it into other, into subjects like health or literature or English
Yeah. Yeah.
or what have you,
Yeah.
as opposed to a hey, we brought somebody in for an hour to tell you that everything you do is wrong.
Yeah. So the embedding part is usually through those capabilities, which again, speaking to the Australian context, the personal and social capability is our version. It's super annoying they called it that. Why couldn't they have just called it the social emotional capability? That would have been heaps easy. Is that version of social emotional learning, right? So regardless of whether we're teaching maths or we're teaching, yeah, like Shakespeare, we probably can find ways by being creative to bring that in. So, we consume as much information in a day as somebody in Shakespeare's time did in their life. What does that tell us about the processing capacity of our brain, right? We don't even have to go beyond that. We can just give people provocations and then we can build upon that. With maths, we can talk about things like how we even developed algebra, how we started learning these things, how we then became reliant on calculators, how calculators was seen as a massive way that kids were going to cheat, right? If we go and look at that and compare it to AI, and we're all freaking out about cheating, we go and look at the headlines around introduction of calculators. And so we can use these historical examples to try and, talk about the challenges that we're having now, and then forecast for some of the things that we might have coming down the line. All right. Because kids are going to inherit the planet that we are designing for them. That's another aspect to this. Like they should actually know a lot about what's happening because they're the ones who are going to have to clean up all of the policies and deal with the outcomes. Yeah, in however many years' time, couple of decades.
Um, that's very true. We're not raising kids, we're raising adults, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you had mentioned about the media literacy,
Hmm.
and recognizing fake news and stuff like that. Um, I know there are some programs, and that's starting up. Um, what's the best way to breach that topic? It's so politicized these days.
Yeah.
One person's fake news is, I don't know, the other one's gospel. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's so. I would go to experts around that. And America has the NAMLE, the National Association for Media Literacy and Education. And Michelle Lipkin is hopefully, I think, still the head of that. I would really lean on resources from their expertise and other organisations like them. You've got in the States the Family Online Safety Institute that do a range of work. Common Sense Media have a digital citizenship aspect, and ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, also have lots of great resources. I think, again, it depends on the context that you're in. So depending on the colour of the state that you're in the US, might then implicate, or predict the kind of space that you have to challenge some of these things. And I know that, everything is political, right? We can pretend that things are not political and try and put gates on these conversations. But I'm you can probably tell not really somebody who's a fan of that, but it can be incredibly scary for teachers to kind of show some of their political colours and their desires in unsafe, maybe, spaces that might be something that you do privately, or parent and teacher kind of organisations. You have PTAs and things
Hmm.
like that. Parent organisations might do that. Again, there's some really interesting organisations over there that, childhood, smartphone free childhood, the organisation that what are they calling themselves? The anxious generation folks, like the people who from Jonathan Haidt's work who are creating that, those four new norms. There's Screen Sanity. We have it here in Australia as well as the US. Range of different organizations that'll help you kind of with some of those tactics privately. Specific to media literacy, that's, I reckon, just conversations that you have in your family often. And it requires us to be really, really up to date sometimes too. So you guys have a really different system to us. I mean, you don't have to vote in your federal elections, and you know when they are. So ours are every 3-ish years. We don't have set terms, like we don't have set dates, but we have to go and vote. Otherwise, it's $60 as a fine. So fun fact on actual civics for you.
Um, Real quick on the video thing. When you do that, you're covering up the microphone a bit,
Oh,
so it's hard to hear
sorry.
you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to
No,
throw
no,
you
that's
off.
okay. I keep forgetting.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I don't think it was too bad, but um, and uh, and forgive me if some of these are a little redundant, but I think there's some nuances to these.
Mhm.
But you touch on this a bit in your presentation, but what are there any tools or classroom strategies or resources you recommend to help students practice mindful and purposeful technol technology use rather than m- to be mindful with it rather than just the passive
Mm,
scrolling, not even realize it. I bet a lot of times people, that phenomenon of people looking for their phone while they're on it,
mm, mm.
not even realizing they're doing it.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the context of if you're in Australia, pretty much phones shouldn't be used. Often kids are reaching for their phones because the research that I've done is like the clock in the classroom isn't working and the teacher says, "What's the time?" So the person with the Fitbit or the phone gets it out. The person maybe was sent off to do some other activity and comes back and has to take down notes and doesn't have time to take down the notes, so they take a photo. There's a whole range of things. Sometimes they're on their phones because their laptop batteries have died and there's not enough PowerPoints in the
Right.
classroom, or they've forgotten their chargers. So there's often a range of practical uses that kids are actually, going for. It's what happens when you go to take the photo and you've got 17 notifications, and rather than taking the photo, you go down that rabbit hole. So that's where, making sure your notifications are angled, but actually declaring, okay, I need to go and do this thing, and narrating that so that you can't get sidetracked, or the opportunity to get sidetracked is less. Um, Sometimes you can actually use, ironically, there's an app for that. I use an app called Freedom. So Freedom, I can turn on my phone and just block I don't have social media on my phone, but I have Instagram. Like that's the only one that I have left. I can just block Instagram for 5 hours. So if I get distracted and I find myself doing that, it just won't let me go there. And that can be really supportive when, yeah, the temptation is too great.
Hmm. I like the narrating strategy. That's what I do when I walk into a room to get something. Right.
So we don't forget.
Yeah, I've heard that like once you cross that barrier, and with a phone,
Mm,
it's like the barrier of the phone opening. Your brain
yeah,
automatically shifts gears, so it's normal to forget,
right.
and the phone
That's right.
and
Yeah.
tech people know that.
Yeah. And the monotasking thing I think is really helpful too. So having a clear learning intention and having just like those single pieces to do within a lesson, starting lessons with a centering activity, right? And that can just be as simple as feel your bum in the seat, feel your feet on the floor, feel your uh, not collarbones, your shoulder blades in the back of the chair, right? And to actually have that anchoring, take some deeper than normal breaths. Okay, and now we're going to start the lesson, all right? And having some of those little rituals and rhythms within your classroom that kids love consistency, right? That's why they love games. Games have rules. Those rules are applied really consistently. Often the kind of complaint I get from young people is that teachers aren't consistent. They don't apply the rules in the same way. That wasn't fair. We're all used to kind of hearing that. And that's right. We don't, because we are responsive creatures who, if humans were good at consistency, I don't think I'd have a job as a psychologist. We'd all just be, going to the gym and eating our green smoothies or drinking our green smoothies. So, how can we build in some of those beautiful rituals that then give kids those clear expectations and consistency?
Yeah, that's good. I was going to ask how can educators really start to model the kinds of digital wellness, um, digital nutrition behaviors in the classroom, especially in tech-rich classrooms. Um,
Yeah.
you were touching on that some, but
Yeah, look, I think it's about declaring what you're doing, right? So to some degree, that narration can happen like, hey, I'm just going to go over here and mark the roll, which is online, right? Like kids, I think, often think that we're just scrolling Instagram or playing Candy Crush and we're not actually using our devices to do all of the administrivia that some person in a bureaucratic system decided was a really good idea because they love data. And again, I'm probably being super facetious with, with that. But, often we're doing the stuff that we maybe didn't actually become teachers for, and being able to declare that, but also not get distracted ourselves. And hopefully by now, most schools have pretty strong kind of net nannies or monitoring systems. So all the super distracting stuff isn't part of our workday. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's all about what you're doing, right? So if you're on there planning lessons or doing your work, that's very, very different to skiving off. The silly anecdote that I give sometimes, and part of why I actually stopped doing student presentations, is often I would rock into fancy private schools, kids would be sitting on the floor, and teachers would be at their laptop doing whatever all throughout the presentation. So I was just like, there's something kind of amiss here. I don't know that I've ever gone to a conference and been sat on the floor and then told to learn. That this just is not conducive to learning. And I'm not there to tell teachers what to do or question what they're doing, whether it's work or not work in the middle of somebody giving a presentation. So, yeah.
um, in your experience, do you see a lot of differences between boys and girls in their relation to this, digital world, or how they take to this idea of the mindfulness and
Look, I think it's more about the personality of the kid than the gender of the kid. So, there's some kids who are like, I want to learn, I want to improve, help me, tell me more. They're those kind of sponges. And then there's other kids who literally, like, if you said the sky was blue, they would have like just the general teenage rebellion kind of thing happening around like, yeah, but. I think it's all about how you as a teacher land and the relationship and the kind of rapport that you build with students, as to whether or not they're going to not listen. Like, I think they're always listening, but whether or not they let on that what you've shared is something that is interesting to them and that they will change. Again, the psychology behind that is really fascinating. When I give presentations, often to parents, I'm always after like the most grumpy looking, skeptical, huffy kind of. It's usually a dad with their arms crossed, halfway up the back to try and get him to smile or pay attention or laugh at one of my cringy mum jokes. And similarly with young people, it's actually, trying to get the kid who seems really like not there to kind of just for a moment consider things differently. And I find the power of memes very, very useful for that. So, when I was doing that work, throwing in something that was very du jour, and, at the moment it would probably be, or down here at least, Labubu dolls. I don't know how internationally well known they are at the moment, but, the Cabbage Patch doll of the day. To demonstrate that you actually get their world and to not invalidate or minimize their world. Because when we're kind of like, Fortnite, whatever, I don't get it, who cares? It's really minimizing the stuff that they love, in a way that I would encourage a lot of, whether you're a parent or a teacher or both, just to remember your own experience of being an adolescent and how important it was for people to actually get you and to validate and share your world. And for analog, growing up in an analog kind of time, me and Tori Amos, my Tori Amos CDs or whatever, you couldn't kind of reach out to the whole fandom because there wasn't that online space that you could really quickly find your people. So just for us to take a moment and remember what we needed, because modern teenagers need the same thing. They're just getting it from many different sources and sometimes not the best ones.
Yeah. Every generation has something that their parents don't understand that they see value in, and it's not that it's bad inherently or trash. It's that you just don't understand it.
Yeah, we didn't grow up with it. And I think it's Douglas Copeland who said, anything that is invented after you're 35 seems like it's against the natural order of things. And it's like that head exploding emoji.
Yeah.
It's like AI for many of us. It's like, no, goodbye. That's the line I'm drawing where I'm not going to try and understand what this means, where it's going, etc. I mean, the fact is, a lot of our young people are turning to generative language models like ChatGPT for advice, for mental health
Yeah.
questions, and that is obviously incredibly concerning, because of the nature of those platforms. They're likely to be more sycophantic. They're more likely to say, yes, you should totally, cyberbully your friend who's not being nice to you, and to hallucinate and give you the wrong information, as opposed to giving you really good quality information because it's trained to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother presentation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're just at time now,
Yeah.
but before we
Perfect.
officially close, any parting words you'd like to leave everyone with?
Oh no, I think everyone has heard way too much from me at this point. Do get in touch if this has been useful, you've stuck around, you've found it beneficial, you have more questions that you would like to take offline. I am really easy to get a hold of. And yeah, you'll have lots of resources hopefully to guide you through. Tell me how you go and tell me your breakthroughs.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much, Jocelyn. I really
You're so
appreciate
welcome.
this, and thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for attending. This is I've made a whole lot of notes myself. I see some other people saying they did the same.
Awesome.
It's a lot of good stuff to take away from here. A lot of stuff to think about.
Fantastic.
All right,
So
thanks again.
appreciated. Thanks for having
All
me.
right,
Bye,
take
everybody.
care.
Ciao. Bye.